It's important we look at the facts. Politics has to be about service.
A modern form of national service.
The outcome, that's for the voters to decide.
Good evening. This is probably the most seismic result that we will see. We've got an exit poll that's just come out that shows the Tories having the worst collapse in their vote ever. We also have the SNP as well, down to almost single digits, and Reform showing greater than the SNP. This is Planet Holyrood. I'm Lorna Hughes, and I'm joined by Hannah, Rodger and Andrew Quinn. Andrew, I know you're working obviously late now. How are you looking at this poll? I don't think any of us can quite believe it.
Oh yeah, I mean, well, maybe we could believe Labour would get over 400 seats because that was kind of predicted. But for the SNP to go on 10 is really about the lowest that we thought they could do. Predictions had been maybe late teens, early 20s, but 10, it's an absolute disaster for them. And it means Labour will be picking up at least 30 of the seats in Scotland, probably more. So yeah, it's an absolute disaster after 9 years of dominance from them in general elections.
Yeah, I don't think anybody predicted as low as that in terms. And when you're looking at this exit poll, when you're seeing Reform with 13 seats, that's even more shocking. I mean, You're right, Andrew. We knew it was going to be a Labour landslide, but I think that was a given. So it's everything else around it that has got really interesting. Hannah, what's your take on this?
Sorry, I'm just, for once, I'm almost speechless. I suppose we should caveat all of this by saying it's just the exit poll. It doesn't, there have been times where they've been notoriously wrong, but I know
not recently.
No, that's what I was going to say. I know that, more recently they have changed the modelling so that they are actually a lot more accurate. But if that is the case for the SNP, that, some serious reflection needs to go on within that party, because that is, much worse than anyone predicted. Even all the polls that we've seen throughout the campaign, the lowest numbers were probably about 16, 18. But 10 is, for Reform to be predicted to secure more seats than the SNP. The SNP would be the fifth largest party. So I think, if that does transpire, there's going to have to be a huge period of reflection by the SNP over what has gone wrong. I think one thing that will be interesting as well, just from speaking to a few contacts this evening, one thing that'll be interesting is to see the turnout, because from speaking to various people, they were saying, the turnout, we think, is going to be quite low. It's been hard to get people motivated to come out. And I think that, that's what we sort of thought during the campaign. It's been really sort of, people haven't been engaged, and I wouldn't be surprised if that translated into a lower turnout than what we're used to seeing.
And therefore the SNP voters not turning out to vote for all sorts of different reasons. And also
probably the Tory voters too.
Yeah.
Because, the Tories losing 241 seats, obviously we don't know which of those are the Scottish seats, but, with numbers like that, the Tories could be wiped out in Scotland.
Yeah. In terms of Labour, I mean, they were obviously on course to get a great result. But Andrew, how do you think they will be feeling right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think they'll still be very cautious. I'm sure we'll see in all the interviews that they'll be saying, oh, well, we've not counted all the votes yet, but they'll be quietly very happy. I mean, it's important to remember just how bad Labour did 4.5 years ago. In 2019, it was the worst election result for since 1935. It was awful, and I imagine you'd put money on them winning over 400 seats in the next election. Then you would have made a killing. So yeah, they will be they'll be quietly very happy, but they won't be celebrating yet until ones are declared. I mean, in Scotland, they'll be absolutely delighted. They won't be able to believe just how well it's gone. Like when Nicola Sturgeon was First Minister, so a year and a half ago, you never would have thought that Labour would do better than the SNP. But that it's been a tumultuous 18 months for the SNP, and they've done really badly. And if they do come in around 10 seats, now they're looking at the Holyrood election next year, and they're going to be like, oh no, we're going to be out of government at this rate. So yeah, it's crazy. And I mean, one of the seats which could go, if the SNP are only on 10 seats, Stephen Flynn could lose his seat out of that, which, I mean, it's massive. You really wouldn't have predicted that beforehand, but it just shows how far Labour have come and actually how much the voters are rejecting the SNP. Even I was speaking to some friends today who've always voted for the SNP, and they were asking me who to vote for, but they didn't want to vote SNP for the first time, and they weren't necessarily convinced by Labour, but just thought the SNP hadn't done enough, really. And I think that's what's coming around, even though this election technically wasn't on their record in the Scottish Government. That's what they've been judged on, I think. And yeah, they'll be regretting it now.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, this is seismic, for every party. I mean, we haven't even talked about the Lib Dems, who, have had a huge resurgence if these exit polls are correct as well. I mean, Ed Davies' party, and obviously the Scottish leader Alex Cole-Hamilton will be delighted by this.
Yeah, I think, it is interesting because in some areas the Lib Dems were afraid that potentially reform, because obviously, you had the disgruntled Tory voters, and, more often than not, they would maybe go to somewhere like the Lib Dems because they wouldn't go so far as to go Labour. But with the sort of introduction of reform, I think the Lib Dems were sort of quietly concerned in some areas that some of their votes would be taken by reform. But actually, the fact that they're up by 53, predicted to be up by 53 seats overall, given that they only had, how many did they have, Andrew? 11? No, something like that. 11 or 12. Yeah, I mean, that's huge. So clearly, all of Ed Davies' bungee jumps and all the rest of it seem to have achieved something.
Or maybe they were just, as Andrew said, for a lot of people who didn't know who to vote for, that maybe that was a more palatable vote this time. The lights have gone out in the office. The lights have gone out in the SNP headquarters.
Maybe that's a bit of a metaphor there.
Swinney it's going to be really, really tricky for him. I mean, obviously he was clear that he said he would remain until 2026. He had no plans. I mean, he's only been in the leader's position for 8 weeks. But so who is to blame for this, and what is to blame? And is it a combination? Yes.
Potentially Peter Murrell might have something to do with it. Nicola Sturgeon, all the ministers who were in charge during COVID and all the deletion of COVID messages. Humza Yousaf and his sort of, not particularly successful period as First Minister, albeit, he is a great people person and he is, he really does engage with people. But I think on a policy perspective, he wasn't the best. And then obviously all the catastrophe with the Greens and the Boot House Agreement, the fact that, the Scottish Government is now being sued over the deposit return scheme. I wonder how much people attribute that to the Scottish Government and therefore the SNP rather than the Green Party, who, Lorna Slater was ultimately in charge of that policy. But I think it just reflects badly on the Scottish Government and people associate that with the SNP. And also I think, there is, even though, we keep saying this is not a Holyrood election, so it doesn't decide the Scottish Government, doesn't decide who's in charge of the Scottish Government. But I still think that people want to send a message. And I think that, you know, the same way that people are fed up of 14 years of the Tories in government, I think people are fed up of 17 years of the SNP. And, you know, this might be just people taking out that frustration. And I think if they did want to ensure, for Holyrood next year or in 2026, that they don't have such a disastrous result, you know, they're going to have to really, really turn things around it. And, you know, I don't know what they could do, you know, short of waving a magic wand and putting, you know, a couple of grand in everyone's bank accounts, which doesn't seem like it.
I mean, Andrew, I think, you know, Hannah's touched on a lot of things that we have all covered over the last year and a half. And yeah, as Hannah says, a message is being sent out, but it could be being sent out by people who are fed up with the SNP, but on both sides. People who have wanted independence and who are really angry, and you can understand why, that it hasn't been delivered, that, you know, they've been, you know, walked up that mountain and back down again at least 15 times now. And then there are the people who do not like the SNP, and again, it's about sending that message as well. It's both of those things, probably.
Yeah, it's certainly a problem, isn't it? Because for ever since they lost the referendum, pretty much 2 years later, they were saying, "Oh, we should have another one because of Brexit." But that was, in reality, that wasn't going to happen. There was no way that the UK government would allow that to happen. So yeah, so with all of their ploys and their attempt to give the Scottish Parliament the power to decide in a referendum, it's, yeah, as you say, it's led people up the hill and then led them back down again. And a lot of people are looking at alternatives. It'll be interesting to see what the Alpha vote's like. I think the Greens will the Scottish Greens will have done quite well in the cities. Are standing in more places than they've ever done before. And that will be eaten into the SNP. But I also think there'll be a lot of folk who do back independence, but will have voted Labour this time because they know that a UK Labour government is definitely better for Scotland because there's going to be more money in general. The likelihood of austerity is a lot less, and they see our public services and know that we need that extra funding, and they know that generally the lives of the poorest in society are a bit better, at least under Labour. So I think when Labour looked like they weren't going to win in other elections, so say 2015, 2017, 2019, did Labour ever really look like they were going to win? Probably not. So folk thought it was a better idea to back the SNP. At least they felt, oh, the SNP will stand up to the Tories. But this time they've had an opportunity to vote for the party that's going to be in government and perhaps have your MP in government, or at least able to lobby that government. So I think that's played a big part as well. But there's no doubt that the SNP's record hasn't helped, and the fact that they don't really have a clear independence strategy. Like they said, if they win the majority of seats, they'll start negotiations for independence. But I mean, if the majority of Scots haven't voted for it, that's a bit ridiculous. Yeah. They've cited a few examples of that, and they said Ireland, and I think they might be forgetting there was a civil war in Ireland, a war of independence and a civil war in Ireland.
Yeah. I mean, that's one thing, Andrew, I was actually going to point out is whatever way the SNP tried to spin this, if those predictions are correct, they do not have a mandate for independence with this result. They do not have a majority and they do not have the most. So, you know, this is actually a really monumental time for us in Scotland because this could actually... it's obviously not going to be an end to the SNP's crusade for independence. Of course not, because that's what the party exists for. But we're so used to them having this majority of Scottish seats in Westminster and them constantly saying that that is their sort of reason why they keep pushing for a referendum. But now they do not have that. And that's, you know, the Labour Party will be able to credibly go back to them and say, well, you don't have a majority according to the latest polls, so you need to stop this. You know, so it'll be interesting to see if perhaps the SNP ramp up that sort of anti-Westminster rhetoric even more, because we obviously saw it hugely under the Tories, especially with Alistair Jack in the Scotland office. And I think, to be honest, Alistair Jack just was doing things to bam up the Scottish government quite often. So,
yeah, Alistair Jack, who's just been, now will be Sir Alistair Jack. He's just been given a knighthood.
Yes, well, we all didn't see that coming, did we?
No. Before we get on to the Tory disaster as well, Hannah and Andrew, who do you think will hold on to their seats then? What prominent politicians from all parties do you think will hold on?
Can I go first?
Yes.
So I think, well, kind of off the top of my head, from the SNP, it's now really, really hard to say. I think Joanna Cherry probably has quite a strong support in her area. Pete Wishart potentially has quite a lot of support in his area. I don't think any of the Glasgow ones are going to hold on to their seat based on that result, because there's 7 of them. But yeah, if I was going to pick the SNP, I'd probably say Pete Wishart and Joanna Cherry. Alistair Carmichael, I'm pretty certain, will hold on to his seat. Obviously Ian Murray, and out of the Tories, I'm just going to say Douglas Ross.
Do you think Douglas Ross has managed to hang on to his newly acquired seat then, if those exit polls with those numbers are correct?
I think, well, if I had to pick one Tory MP currently who, well, actually no, wait, I'm gonna reverse Ferret on that and actually say John Lamont. Yeah. Because I think the SNP have been really, really hammering the Douglas Ross's seat, and they've been campaigning and everything, and also given the Tory results. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if every Tory MP in Scotland lost their seat, to be quite honest.
Yeah. And Andrew, anything you want to chuck in?
Yeah, I think Joanna Cherry will have lost her seat if this exit poll's correct, because there were a few polls which had said she would have lost. I think I think you're right. Pete Wishart probably will have done okay. I think David Mundell will probably hold on for the Tories. It looks, if the SNP have only got 10 seats, I can't really imagine they've taken many off of the Tories.
No.
And if they have, that means they've lost all the other ones. So that could mean the Lib Dems have gained a few. I'm thinking of the Highlands seats. I'm thinking the one like Fort William, Charles Kennedy's old seat, which they'd thought there was a very distant chance of that happening. But if the result was so bad for the SNP, they might have done it. They threw quite a lot at it. I would think the SNP have also lost in East Dunbartonshire as well, which is where Amy Callaghan is. For Labour, I mean, Ian Murray will have held on, Michael Shanks, and then we're going to see a whole slew of Labour MPs across the Central Belt. We're going to see Jimmy Reid's granddaughter, probably, Joni Reid. She's probably one in East Kilbride if the exit poll's right. It is quite interesting to look at that. It's a complete change-up. And I mean, the SNP group's going to be so strange now.
I think
the people they've lost.
As you've identified, it does look as if Flynn could have potentially lost his seat, which then leaves them in an even more weakened position.
Yeah, he may cling on, but a lot of his ally, if it's 10, the likelihood that he's clinging on is pretty slim. But a few of his allies will be gone as well. I mean, David Linden and Stephen Bonner, 2 of his close allies, will almost certainly be gone because David Linden's in Glasgow, Stephen Bonner's in Coatbridge. So it will be a very different group, and there'll be folk there who aren't necessarily aligned to Flynn if he does continue. So, and in a very small group, that could be really difficult for him. And he's not going to have that slot at PMQs every week. If they're the fifth party, he doesn't even get a slot every 6 weeks. So it's changed days for the SNP in Westminster, it looks like.
Yeah, it'll be Ed Davey. Ed Davey will get the
Well,
third place.
as long
Which
as we
will
don't,
actually,
we don't have bungee jumping or anything, or anything like that as he stands up.
yeah.
The other story down south, and it is hugely significant for us as well, obviously up here, is the total collapse of the Tory vote. And, we are now going to be looking at a very different House of Commons. And I don't think the Tories have ever been in this position. I mean, how are they going to react to that as well?
I think
the big guns are going to lose their seats, and that to me suggests that Rishi's losing his seat, and then you can take your pick of the rest of them.
I mean, I think. Sorry, Andrew, on you go.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're going to come to a deal with reform, really, because that's what will have ruined them in so many seats. The fact that the right of centre vote has been completely split, it will have meant that Labour's won more than they necessarily should have, and also the Lib Dems will have come in. So I think who'll be left? Kemi Badenoch's probably the most likely leader, because Penny Mordaunt's going to have lost her seat. Yeah. Jeremy Hunt will have lost his seat. Lots of big folk will have lost their seats. So, I mean, for the Tories will either do a deal with reform or they won't, and they'll be in the doldrums for quite a while. I couldn't imagine they would come back in 5 years' time if this is the result, and they don't do a deal with reform. If they do a deal and Farage comes in, I mean, is Farage going to sit by and not be the leader? Definitely not. He's going to be aiming to be the Conservative Party leader and leader of the opposition, which I don't think you could rule that out, given how badly this has gone for the Conservatives.
I wonder if there'll be any kind of humility either from either the Tories or the SNP, because I think I think the country is owed an apology. I mean, the country looks as if it's spoken. And it's been the first chance for many people to do that since Partygate, since all of the scandals that have engulfed them, that we've all to stand by and watch, as you reeled off, Hannah, and up here as well.
I mean, I could go on. I didn't want to all of them. I thought Andrew might want to add a few more in. iPad Gate.
Yeah, I mean, that certainly hasn't helped, has it? That was at the very start of the campaign. It was a great opportunity for John Swinney to show that he was different from Humza Yousaf and that he wanted transparency. So he could have told Michael Matheson, look, you've got to resign from your seat. And what we'll do is we'll have the by-election on the same day as the general election. It might not have ended up that bad for them, actually. They could have held on because of that, because most folk would be thinking of the general election. But
he didn't even, the ridiculous thing about that was, it's not that he didn't ask him to resign. John Swinney actually said he did not support the sanction.
Yeah, it was terrible optics.
It just reminded me so much of the Boris Johnson, Owen Patterson.
Exactly the same, Hannah.
And people don't forget these kind of things, and clearly we're seeing that today.
Yeah, it's very true. I think you have to think about how does this look to the public, and perhaps when politicians have been in power for so long, they don't think about that. But if they'd gone down a pub and asked anyone what did they think, they would have said, accept the sanctions and he should resign his seat. That would have been simple. After all the chaos that had happened under Humza Yousaf, where he should have acted earlier. But it was too much of, try to keep your pal on a job. And of course that doesn't look good. And of course the voters are going to punish you for it.
Yeah. Well, it's going to be an interesting few hours, and we will have obviously the final results probably 4 or 5 o'clock. Andrew, have you got the Red Bull and the sweeties sorted? Because you're up all night, aren't you?
Yeah, I've brought my coffee machine into the office actually, so I'll be sorted. I'm here till 7 in the morning, and then covering whatever events going on tomorrow as well. So it will be a long day, but it's what we do the job for, isn't it?
Absolutely. Hannah, Andrew, thank you very much for joining me, and we will see what tomorrow brings.
Okay.
It's important we look at the facts. Politics has to be about service.
A modern form of national service.
The outcome, that's for the voters to decide.